Welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. Today's conversation is with Hongwei. Hongwei is the CEO and one of the co-founders at Mappedin, and this is a conversation about a school project to help people find stuff indoors that evolved into a leading indoor mapping company. And so, as you might have guessed, today we're talking about indoor mapping. And one of the challenges that came up during the conversation, which I hadn't thought about before, is the fact that most indoor spaces are privately owned. Listen in and you'll hear why that makes things difficult in terms of data collection. And another striking thing about this conversation is listen to the way Hongwei talks about his customers. What do they want? Not what is possible. What do they want? What makes a difference to them? What are they willing to pay for? What are they willing to invest in? What is going to work for them? And I think the answer will surprise you. Before we get started, I need to let you know that every company that is featured on this podcast, I ask all of them to help cover the costs of producing their episodes. Some companies refuse, aren't interested, and some companies like Mappedin say yes, they will help support my work, and I really appreciate that. It doesn't just mean that their podcast episode gets made, it means that all of the podcast episodes get made, and I honestly couldn't do it without companies like Mappedin. So thank you very much, Mappedin. I really appreciate your support. Hi, Hongwei. Welcome to the podcast. I had the pleasure of listening to you talk last year at the North 51 conference in Banff, and I've been hoping to get a chance to talk with you ever since. And now here you are. So this is great. You are the founder and CEO of something called Mappedin. Why don't we start there? Why don't you give us a brief introduction and then we'll talk about Mappedin and indoor mapping and what you do there.
I would love to. And Daniel, it's an absolute pleasure. I wish both of us were still back in the mountains in Banff, but we'll have to make that happen another time. So yeah, my name is Hongwei. I'm one of the founders here at Mappedin. More than 10 years ago, we started this as a school project to help people find stuff indoors. We thought that would be a useful problem to solve. And we tried to do that for the local university, the local mall, the local hospital, random buildings who would take our call as a bunch of students trying to build stuff. And if you fast forward to today, about a third of the malls in the world are Mappedin customers, Mappedin users. You've probably used our products. The nicest mall you've been to recently is probably a Mappedin user. You've touched the touchscreen, you've used our web app. The Super Bowl for the last 2 years has been a Mappedin user in the OnePass app. Close to 10% of the Fortune 500's corporate offices are powered by us behind the scenes for people to find desks, find meeting rooms, view occupancy. We're thrilled to have some of the partners that we worked with in that space bring us into those opportunities and into those applications. So we're one of the largest indoor mapping companies in an emerging space. And I'm hopeful that some of your listeners may be listening to this and thinking, oh no, what's indoor mapping about? I don't know too much about it. And maybe this will be a fun conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. That's interesting to say that the nicest mall that you've been to recently, you've probably touched one of our maps. And it really made me think about, that's right. Yeah, you go to a mall, you go to a big organization, and typically there is a screen there of some sort where you can see a building footprint, where you can see a layout, where you can navigate. And that could have been you guys. I'll have to pay more attention to that going forwards.
Well, in New Zealand, Kiwi Properties is a nationwide customer of ours. So chances are it was us.
Cool. You said you gave some numbers there, 30% and named a bunch of big sort of companies, organizations that use your products. If we compare this to outdoor mapping, just for a second, in fact, I think this will be a very useful contrast, as we move through the conversation. Could you give us a sense of where we are in terms of, how much of the indoor world has been mapped? When you think of the outdoor world, like a lot of it has been mapped. And sure, we could argue about the detail that it's been mapped in, but we have satellites circling around the world all the time, essentially mapping things. Indoor environment is a little bit different. Where are we at, do you think, in terms of the percentage of indoor mapped environments?
Yeah, I would say close to 0%, certainly less than 1%. We're just scratching the surface. I mean, I would agree with you that the outdoor world is, for all intents and purposes, mapped. You can argue to what degree of accuracy, to what degree of frequency, but there's a digital map that's pretty much real time of any place on Earth that you can rely on from 10 different vendors. And then it's really just the applications that you build. Whereas if you think about the indoors, we maybe have like a 10% coverage of what has been mapped indoors in terms of these premium buildings, premium sites that have invested in wayfinding experiences, guest experiences, and now increasingly into digital operations and solutions for that. but it's less than 1% as a whole because most buildings you go into, you're looking for the PDF. You're looking for that fire escape map that's posted by the entrance by law. You're looking for the black and white thing that someone has scribbled on that tells you maybe where to go, or a brochure for Disneyland that was literally drawn by an artist. I wouldn't call those maps in the same way that we've come to rely on. And that's one of the problems that we're trying to solve and many others in our space are trying to solve.
So this lack of coverage, let's call it that, this lack of coverage in terms of indoor maps, is it because the problem is too hard or is it because it's not important?
So I would say it's a bit of both, or it has been a bit of both, and both have changed in these past couple years. So this amazing story I heard and I read about years ago when we were early days was that actually back in the early 2000s, let's talk about HART. So in the early 2000s, DARPA did a study in partnership with Esri, the giant GIS company that everyone I'm sure on this call has heard of, to say what would it take to map the indoors once to like indoor GML5 or something that Esri had created. And they found that it would take 10% of the US workforce working 10 years nonstop, 40 hours a week
Wow.
to do it once. So basically it was impossible back then. Because if you imagine how much effort and labor and man hours, human hours it's taken to map the outdoors to the level of detail that we now take for granted, it actually is over like the last 50 decades of digitization, a lot of time. And the outdoors is actually simpler than the indoors, just in terms of the density of stuff that you would have to start mapping, like certainly once you get into desks or four foot sectionals in warehouses. So there's so much more to do. But the other thing about the indoors that makes it hard to digitize is that it's private. So it's 99% private property. You can't just drive cars down the road and scrape all the data and collect it using clever methods. You can't fly satellites over it. It's private. So you have to work with hundreds of millions of private landlords in aggregate. And the second part that's hard is that the indoors changes really frequently. We have customers like airports will have swing gates where part of the airport is international, so international territory in the morning and domestic in the afternoon. There'll be gates that change every hour. Santa Claus moves at the mall every year is like a fun joke I make. And, desks move around in offices. Doctors change their locations all the time. The indoors is dynamic in a way that the outdoors isn't. So it's been basically impossible to imagine how you can use, let's say, pro tools and drawing tools to digitize the indoors, because even if you did it, which would be gargantuan, it'd be out of date. So that's one reason I think it's we're still waiting for coverage. And the second reason is I think you hit the nail on the head. It hasn't been that important if we're all honest with each other. And that's okay. A lot of the foundations had to be laid. Outdoor digital maps wasn't that useful until everybody had a smartphone with a mapping app on it, until GPS worked with that smartphone and made this delightful navigation experience possible. Outdoor maps got more useful when Expedia came out and allowed you to book the nearest hotel based on where you wanted to be looking at a map. So outdoor maps, the utility of having this data set increases as the ecosystem builds around it. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem. And what we're seeing today is that like we're really excited, and I think everyone in our industry is, because now everybody is talking about digital applications inside buildings. How do you optimize logistics in a warehouse? How do you create great guest experiences that are increasingly just table stakes? Every mall must now do what we've standardized because people just expect it. Airports can run more efficiently. Hospitals can save lives. There's now all these use cases that are being built that have emerged that are calling for this data set to exist. And we're building tools, and other people are building tools that are now making it possible to keep the indoors up to date. So I think we're seeing the change happen in front of us, and hopefully we're going to be part of it.
Yeah, are people also just asking the simple question like, hey, I can do this outside. Why can't I do this inside? Why is this experience not seamless? Is that at all a driver here?
It certainly is. I mean, the initial pitch for Mappedin was Google Maps for the indoors, right? It is something that everybody expects at this point. And why can't I have it for this private venue? And now you can. So wayfinding is always the first use case. But then you start to get into things like analysis and optimization, which anyone in geomatics will know is really where you get the ROI for investing in more and more mapping capabilities. And those same principles apply indoors. What's the best way to lay out my warehouse? What's the best way to lay out my office? What's the occupancy? How do I just visualize how my physical assets being used? And let's not forget the real estate industry is the world's largest asset class. They're not short of money, but what they've been searching for is signal on what do I do with all this? Like, so what? I know how to build houses. I know how to invest in marble and build amazing buildings. I know how to do that. What's the point? What do I get if I invest in a digital map? And that the answer to that now is 10 different things. And that's now what's driving a lot of the adoption that we're seeing.
Okay, so but to do any of this analysis, this business intelligence, if you will, we need a map. Like we need some data to work with.
For sure.
So how are people? Actually, let's start with you. How are you creating maps today? What does the process look like?
Yeah, so we've been building tools for the average person, for a computer savvy person, but not a geomatics, GIS savvy person or an architecturally savvy person. So our focus has been let's enable the person who's already scribbling on a piece of paper. If ultimately our goal is to replace the PDF map that is still ubiquitous, our realization is that actually we don't have to do anything miraculous. We just have to enable the paper scribblers. When we started our business at Mappedin and we worked with all those different types of buildings, we were building applications. We were building wayfinding applications, web applications. But what kept happening is the customer would send us a PDF with scribbles on it every 3 months. Hey, this is what's wrong. This is what's right. Here's what's changed. Here's what's changing next week. So you may as well capture that. And here are my notes. Can you please Photoshop that or do whatever you need to do and update my website? And that's what we would do. And of course, we hated doing that kind of work over and over. It was so repetitive. So we ended up building tools for ourselves, non-experts as we were, to make it easier. We built tools into the web browser. We made them collaborative so that I could log in and make changes and you could log in and make changes. And kind of like Google Docs, we can see what each other are doing. It's just easier than taking pictures of a scribble back and forth. So we built tools for ourselves for the first year. And then we had a lucky stroke of genius, which is where we showed those tools to our customers. And it turns out our customers immediately recognized the value of those tools, not just for maintaining web maps for shoppers, but leasing maps for customers and security maps for security guards. And then the list goes on. And that was an initial aha moment for us. And we started investing more and more in those tools. So today we have now tens of thousands of users who are using our tools to maintain a live source of truth of what's going on. There's as much automation as we can think to build in because it's all about enabling that regular user with a PDF to get up and running with a digital map as quickly as possible. So it's seeing's believing, 5 minutes or less, sign up on our website, upload a floor plan you have kicking around, take a picture of one. The AI does most of the work of turning that into a useful digital map, and you can author it from there. And so we want that delightful experience of you can do this. You don't have to call somebody. You don't have to outsource this to your digital agency. You can, if you own your building and you care what the front of the building looks like, you should care what the digital copy is too, and you can do it yourself. And how do we enable all the people who run buildings and all the people who are now delivering these services, these other digital solutions to the physical world, to the built environment, to own this incredibly important part of the user experience and to see it as a piece of the infrastructure that they can maintain.
You said a lot of interesting things there. One of the things you said was making it sound like the PDF was the incumbent. We need to do something better than the PDF. And some people will hear that and go, oh, digital twin.
Yeah, of course.
I can carry this LiDAR scanner around with me. I can use computer vision and, we can make a very close to true copy of the indoor environment. Why was that? Like, I understand that might not have been your answer, 10 years ago because a lot of this technology didn't exist then, but now, why don't you do that now?
Well, it's an option, right? We actually have this, really cool free iOS app that if you have one of the new iPhones or iPads with LiDAR built in, you can download the Mappedin app and create a live 3D or a realistic live capture 3D model of your space in a couple minutes just walking around. It does feel like magic. What I think people don't talk about as much though, when they push the narrative of the digital twin, is what problem are you trying to solve? And I think we've always been so customer focused here at Mappedin because our focus is on the map maker, on the user who has a job to do. And they're trying to create a better guest experience for shoppers, let's say. So, okay, if that's what you're trying to do, what are shoppers looking for? I often point out to my friends jokingly who, when we talk about digital twins, like, hey, if you're driving in your car down on the highway and you're using maps on the dash, Android Auto, CarPlay, are you using the map or Street View? You're probably going to use the map, right? It's probably going to be top down. Like sometimes a little bit of 3D extrusion and landmarks is really helpful, but most of the time, we humans require abstractions to function. I don't want to see a LiDAR point cloud of the world. I want to see a map because I just want to know where to go. And luckily, the map is so much easier to make and maintain than having to constantly recapture what's going on. So I think there's a time and place for digital twins. It's incredibly useful for selling property, doing virtual tours, for example. So it's taken off in the residential and multifamily space quite a bit. And I think it's like the digital successor to that architectural model that the intern used to make when when an architectural firm gets hired to like build a building and manage the entire project. Somebody has to like literally do an arts project and build a model because it looks cool, and that's just like it's just a sales tool. And the digital twin, I feel like, is the new version of that. But nobody in their right mind operates a building based on a paper mache that a architecture student has made, right? They're operating a building based on PDFs with scribbles on it. It has been our experience. So I think the universal use case that we care about is what is the map of the operating building? Because 90%, 99% of the buildings in the world are not being built anymore. They're operating. They're run on a shoestring budget. They don't have experts lying around who know how to use these pro tools, and they don't need anything shiny. They need fresh coat of paint. They need clean garbage bags. They need lights to be on, and they need maps that work, that serve the purpose that they're trying to solve for, whether it's guest experience or leasing or, a quick security lookup. They need tools that are fit inside their current workflows. And we've always been focused on that, for better or worse, I guess, at Mappedin, because it's not sometimes as shiny, but we're very proud of the users, the map makers and the map users that we've been able to help along the way. And that's always been our North Star.
You can really hear the customer focus when you talk, which is great. So if I'm understanding you correctly, we've got these two sort of main ways of getting data into your system or producing these maps. One is I show up with a PDF and then you do some magic on it and help me annotate it and probably also georeference it. My guess is that's relatively important if you're going to show it in a broader context. And then you have an app where we can scan the room, walk through the building and scan it and extract features that way. In both these ways, what is the minimum that I need to extract, or what are the landmarks that are necessary for this map to fulfill its functions? Like, what do you need? If we don't need a true digital copy of everything in the room, what is it that we need? What is helpful here?
Yeah, so it depends on the use case. Since we launched our freemium tool on our website, which really is just open to the public and now anyone can see what we're talking about, we've seen hundreds and hundreds of students and teachers and administrators map their schools for parent-teacher night, or for safety use cases, just for general wayfinding, for when the plumber shows up to fix something. So if you're trying to create a map for that, you probably want just the public spaces. You don't necessarily need all the utility closets and so on. You want the classrooms labeled, you want the front doors, you want where to park, you want, which door to knock on. Maybe you want where are the fire drill muster points, things like that. And so like it's actually really cool to watch what people have made, because we're lucky we get to see the public maps that people have now since published with our stuff, and more of it happens every day. I think the other day I saw what has to be, I think, the world's largest animal shelter somewhere in the US created a map for every single pet enclosure that they have, because it's huge. And for that, they figured out how to use emojis to actually have proper labeling and logos for where the cats and dogs are, big dogs, small dogs, and other more exotic pets. It follows the use case. This is a tool for someone who was going to scribble on a piece of paper and now doesn't have to. It's not going to replace, I think, the folks that are trying to create like a BIM model or a BOMA certified model for an upcoming renovation. You're going to go grab that LiDAR tripod and do a proper job of that. But I'll just point out that, that's as soon as you create that model, it's useful for the, let's say, the architectural purpose, but it's probably out of date by tomorrow. Something's changed. And how are you going to go edit it? Well, probably not by setting up the tripod again. Whereas what we're seeing is that people are able to now treat these as living documents and that they publish on their website or inside an application that they already have. and they just spend five minutes a day. What's changed? What do I need? What was I going to jot down by email or on a post-it? And now I can just do it right in the browser and keep this map up to date myself.
So a lot of the use cases that we're talking about there, we're talking about navigation, wayfinding. Most people listening to this podcast will be familiar with navigation in terms of Google Maps. Is it the same user experience? Am I using a map and saying, navigating, I've got to walk past the water cooler over to, 3 doors down and to the left and then up the stairs? Is that what I'm expecting? Or is it that visual navigation where I don't get any instructions, but I can just see, okay, I look at a map in the same way I would outside and I can just see, I need to hit that, that corridor there and then go left.
Yeah, I think Google Maps with the indoors is still a good enough proxy if we're talking about wayfinding. There were a couple of things that we had to rethink to make wayfinding more intuitive. So, for example, and this I think comes back to why hasn't this happened yet? I mean, some of it's just hard. So, for example, outdoor mapping doesn't really have the concept of multi-level. I think anyone who's traveled anywhere has the experience of going to the airport where there's like a departures and arrivals level, and your GPS, your Google Maps app or Apple Maps can't tell which level you're on. And it's sometimes quite confusing if you know that the Uber pickup is actually on departures or vice versa. You kind of have to figure that out the old-fashioned way. It feels quite barbaric, actually. So the indoors is almost always multi-level. So having wayfinding that works by default that way, how do you visualize it? It turns out most of the rendering SDKs that everybody has just agreed to use, the leaflet libraries, the map libres, the really smart people that built those SDKs didn't really think about how to render something multi-level for wayfinding and for mapping. The BIM people have, but then you need a computer. You need like a desktop to have that be a performant experience in the browser. But on a low-powered Android phone, you need something way more lightweight. So we had to then rip apart all the SDKs that people take for granted outdoors and say, how do we incorporate multi-level? How do we incorporate landmark-based directions? Because streets don't exist and north, south, east, west means nothing. So rethinking a lot of these fundamental things, not because we were prescient and thought to do it a priori, but just because we've been working with our customers all these years, and every single customer makes us a little bit better as a platform. The Super Bowl made us a whole lot better this year because they care about every small detail, as you can imagine. And so do our new airport customers that have some of the most dynamic spaces we've ever encountered.
That was a really good overview, but I'm still sort of missing the answer to the question. Like what?
Oh, sorry.
How do we get those landmarks in there? Do I sit and annotate that? Does your app pick those up? And then what do the instructions look like? Is it, again, back to that Google Maps experience where go to the water cooler because I put that annotation in there?
The source of truth is still the human. I think we're quite human-centric in how we're designing our tools because we're trying to enable the person that really knows. The alternative, and I think the temptation, is to imagine, is there a way to just like scan everything and do, computer vision on the plant, on Santa, on the fountain? And there probably is. And you can probably derive some kind of automated data set, but it'll still be at least 50% wrong. And that's assuming that you can convince the landlord of the building to open every closet, to light up every room, to let you take a photorealistic scan of everything. And remember, this is private property everywhere you go. So that seems really unlikely. So the alternative is, how do we work with the data we already have, which is, worst case, the fire escape map that's on the wall or filed with the city. Average case, it's a PDF map that someone has already made once. That is a good starting point. So let's digitize that. Let's OCR and computer vision that. And then let's give tools that allow the office manager, the facility manager, the marketing coordinator, the front desk, the building owner that runs a multi-tenant commercial storefront. Let's give those people who are doing it anyway. My mom is kind of one of the go-to. Like, she's computer savvy. She knows how to use Microsoft Word, but nothing more fancy than that. That person should be able to edit a map. That person should be able to log in and say, "Hey, Santa's gone. It's a popcorn stand now." Or the game was yesterday. Now it's a rock concert. Beyonce's here on Sunday. And like, people know this information. It's in people's heads, and they were going to write it down or type it out on an email. But let's just get them to actually make maps, and let's believe that that's possible, because that's happened everywhere else in technology. Is that what used to be done by experts is now done by you and me, and the world's better for it.
But when you mentioned there, start going back to this PDF map as an example. You said, let's computer vision that, let's OCR that. What does that mean?
What we've done today and what we launched about 5 months ago is a self-serve freemium tool that allows you to draw maps by hand if you want to. And we've seen people do that. We've had like 3 dozen Christmas concerts, Christmas markets that were drawn by hand over this past Christmas season for people to put on their website. Or you can take a photo of that map that's hanging on the wall or sitting in your shelf or a file on your computer. And we've trained a computer vision model over really the last 3-4 years to automatically vectorize the raster image and do as much cleanup as we can. And we're getting better every day, but it's no means perfect. But do as much cleanup as we can on the noise, on the coffee stains, on the random lines, the architect's signature, and annotate what we can recognize. And we're recognizing doors, windows, room labels, fire safety symbols, common other symbols like elevators, escalators, stairs. Again, improving that model every day. And this was an effort that we started back in 2019 when we partnered with Homeland Security in the US to adapt our existing commercial tools that, again, all the big venues are using, to adapt those tools for public safety, for firefighters and police officers. Because it turns out the firefighter in your city probably makes more indoor maps than anybody else. And nobody knows that. We were blown away when we accidentally just happened. Like, I think one of our developers had an uncle who was a firefighter. And, when you tell them, oh yeah, we're building these mapping tools, like the mall manager is able to make maps now. How cool is that? And he goes, well, no way, I make maps. Like, what? And you ask that person, like, what do you mean? And then he'll show you the binder that's in the back of his fire truck. And the binder is the binder that you and I had in high school or grade school with like the plastic pages, the plastic inserts and paper pages in between. And in there are just floor plans with scribbles on it, because when the fire department gets called to your office or your big building, they don't know what's inside and they want some kind of awareness in advance. So they have these binders that are the best efforts of the local fire department, fire prevention officer, to have a standardized set of notes of what they might be walking into.
Wow.
And they only care about so many things. And so that just completely blew our mind. So we thought, okay, well, that's a problem we should solve. That's a problem, frankly, that we didn't even know about. And we thought we knew about all the problems in indoor mapping at the time. So we went all in on that, more of a passion project than anything else. I almost cared too little about if it would make money. And then we realized, though, when we made it work, and DHS was kind enough to press release it on their website 2 years ago, when we got it to work for them, we realized, well, if firefighters can make maps, and these are guys who like work out all day and like run inside with an axe, if they can make maps, anybody can make maps. So why is Joe the firefighter or fire prevention officer making maps all day when building owners do it too? When office managers are doing it, when leasing coordinators are doing it, when insurance companies are doing this, when city planning departments are doing this, there's like for every single professionally managed building, there's 8 map scribblers maintaining the same data. They're just doing it on paper. And so can we get all those people to collaborate on a digital source of truth? Can we invite them to Google Docs as collaborators? And can we build tools that are intuitive to all of them? And none of this is like, rocket science. I think it's hard to get right. It's hard to make it simple enough. And the AI has to almost be invisible. It has to feel natural because, again, it has to feel like tools that people use every day. But that's the mission. If there is one at Mappedin, is firefighters making maps. Because if we can do that, we get coverage, and everyone else can too.
So a couple of things occurred to me. The first one was a story about a utilities company I used to work for. And it wasn't so long ago that they were literally driving around with every van, where they go out to fix a pipe somewhere or fix a leak or dig something up. Every single van that they were driving around and had a filing cabinet full of maps in it. And that was the solution, right? So they had like 7 different copies of this filing cabinet. Every van had one, and that's how they found things. So things have changed, luckily, and they've moved online. But in terms of the bleeding edge of what's possible in geospatial, they're a long way behind. Like their go-to offline solution when they're going to a place where the coverage isn't great is still the PDF map. It's still not necessarily a filing cabinet. They'll print something off before they head out, but it's still like, a physical map that is that is their go-to solution in terms of offline, because they need to know where that data is, and it's not always possible to get it somewhere else. It also occurred to me that part of what I did at that utilities company was make sure other people had access to the data. So, where are all the cables? Where are all the water pipes, kind of thing? And then there was other organizations within the community that needed to know that kind of stuff. Emergency response would have been a classic. And so we did exactly what you said. We maintained it in a central source. Everybody wasn't maintaining. I was maintaining this data, but I made it available to people in a format that they could read and understand. But it was only one map maker, me, like maintaining that data and then providing services to them that they could pull on. But it only needed to be updated once, that one central source of truth. And it was interesting to hear you say that that's still the situation we're in when we think about indoor mapping, that we're still struggling to get that sort of central source of truth that we can then deliver to people and say, hey, I'm the expert here. I know how to maintain this stuff. I'll do that. All you have to do is, pull on the service that I'm sending to you.
Yeah, and the problem indoors, like history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, I guess is kind of the string we're pulling on here. The problem indoors really does feel like the journey that outdoors went through, but there isn't one authoritative source of truth. There's eight, right? Everybody that is involved in running a modern building has their own slice of the information that they care about that no one else cares about or even knows. If you want a source of truth, if you want a digital twin, even, you have to somehow engage all of those eight people. Because I'll just give you a really simple example. Like if you want to map a grocery store because the on-demand delivery company shows up and wants a better digital map so they can optimize their picking when they then do, order online, deliver to your door. So you want to map a grocery store and you talk to the grocery store manager. Can I have your map, please? They'll probably give it to you if you convince them, but 10% will be wrong. Why? Because extra potatoes showed up that morning and the produce manager has decision-making power to put them over there. The rotisserie chicken sold out. So that's just gone. And somebody knows that, but they're not going to update the map that head office gives you. That's 6 months old. So, the forfeit sectionals will be right. The end caps will be wrong. Produce will be all over the place. And about 10% is always off indoors. And if you try to get that last 10%, you realize it's in people's heads. It's on Post-it notes. It's on whiteboards. It's in email. It's on that PDF that's been scribbled on. And then how do we pull all of those different systems together to create this source of truth? But I'm very lucky, I think, first that we're building Mappedin and the indoors is being built, the indoor geospatial industry is being built in the footsteps following what has already been done. I can use terms like Google Maps to the indoors and you know what I mean. I feel specifically lucky here at Mappedin that we have two board members who were VPs at MapQuest in the 90s. Like when MapQuest was like the coolest thing that had ever happened, and apparently they had saturated completely the US internet bandwidth at the time. So they were like the Netflix of their day. So they saw that entire movie play out. And what they remarked to me after joining our board for a couple months is, Hongwei, indoor mapping kind of feels like outdoor mapping in the 90s. It's way too early. The use cases have still yet to emerge. The smartphone hadn't come out yet. And there were a lot of different players trying a lot of different things. And there's not going to be that many in 10 years. But it's the early days and it's exciting. That's how we feel. Like it's early innings. People are starting to care. And hopefully the bets that we're making and the users that we're focused on, that's going to work.
Yeah, so let's pull on that string just a little bit more. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that your outdoor maps got a lot more useful when GPS and cell phones showed up,
Yeah.
and smartphones showed up. We saw this explosion of use cases that no one had ever dreamt of before.
Totally.
So let's talk a little bit about indoor positioning, because before we can have that same kind of explosion, we need to be able to position things accurately in the indoor environment.
Yes, certainly. And it's hard. I cannot believe how many things have been tried that haven't worked. I mean, the only real job I had before Mappedin, I was an RF engineer at BlackBerry, then called Research in Motion. And it was my job to test Bluetooth and Wi-Fi circuits. And so I have like a 101 understanding of electromagnetism and antenna design. And the main thing I remember from that work experience is, whoa, this stuff is like black magic. And also it is basically impossible to use Bluetooth signals or beacons to triangulate a signal because of just everything. Like humidity changes, you're toast. You put it on the wrong side of your head is incredibly attenuating because we're all salt water, and salt water is like one of the best blockers of RF signals. So In the early days, the main question I would always get from customers is, how do you do indoor positioning? And should I buy this beacon? And I would just keep saying, no, please don't do that. It's not going to work. Here's why. And I would do this like long explanation that probably made no sense. And we watched all of our customers blow about $1 million each per building buying beacons, like the big malls, the big airports, the big venues, and then just throw them away. So it's been really fun and exciting to now watch the giant companies of the world, Apple, Cisco, Google, start to wade in on we need to solve this problem at an operating system level. So, Apple has released core location. They bought a company called Wi-Fi Slam, which is actually built here in Waterloo about 11 years ago. And so they use the passive Wi-Fi signals and everything else the phone can already detect. So, accelerometers, compasses, gyroscopes, and the passive RF that a phone can see. So the Wi-Fi, the ambient Bluetooth, ambient cell tower signals to create a statistical model where the phone might be. It's something that really only, in this case, Apple could do for iOS, because some of those signals you can't even pull for at a frequency that is at a sufficiently high frequency. If you're an app, you pretty much have to be the operating system. So in the past 5 years, we've gone from, in my opinion, a lot of stuff that was never going to work, like physically could not work, but was getting tried, to now these highly capitalized companies spending the kinds of R&D you have to get RF right, to solve it at an operating system level if you're Apple, to solve it at an access point level if you're Cisco or Aruba. That's starting to work. We're thrilled to see that for like almost a majority now of our public menu customers, you can have blue dot positioning, indoors, outdoors. It just works. It's got some fuzziness like it always does. Like if you take your GPS into an urban canyon outdoors, the circle gets big. If you take it into like a really open space at an airport, the circle gets a little big because all of a sudden statistically you could be in more places at once. But we're incrementing towards that level of accuracy, and we're doing it the same way that it happened outdoors. To solve for GPS outdoors, the US government had to fire satellites into space with classified technology called GPS so that they could nuke the Soviets more accurately. Like it took a nation state level of investment to put that technology in place and to monetize it. And similarly, I think we're seeing Apple, Google, Cisco, Samsung, Aruba, the giant hardware vendors of the space invest, let's say comparative levels of money to sell devices. And the exhaust from that is now better indoor positioning. And that, as to your point, makes what we're doing and what all the ecosystem is building a little bit more useful and more impactful. And that's exciting for us.
A company like yours is creating, I guess what I'd loosely term as, base maps for the indoor environment. Base maps, right? The maps that we can navigate off, maps that we can share, common understandings of like this is what it looks like, and then people can come and put these other layers. In GIS world, we'll talk about these other layers on top of it and start building analysis and things like this. And now we're seeing this. I think it was a great way of describing it, almost like a nation state level of investment in getting indoor positioning right. So this has got to be exciting times for you. What do you think when you think about the future? Like for me, I think I would immediately start to think about augmented reality.
There's so many places it could go from here. And I think it's fun to be able to look at what's possible because it's already been done, right? All the things that we take for granted outdoors, not even outdoors, just in life, because we have great outdoor mapping, booking hotels, obviously finding our way, planning trips, scoping the college campus you're going to be on someday. Governments around the world are using mapping for analysis, for business intelligence, for urban planning, for national defense, and public safety. The use cases are all so tangible, and we probably see a digital map every day, maybe twice. It's like a toothbrush problem. And then you go indoors and those use cases, the map is missing and the use cases are starting to emerge. So I get excited about that. On AR specifically, though, I just saw my colleague, Ed, walk by with his Vision Pro on. So, hey, the future is now. It's actually happening. It's like kind of funny that this is happening. But how many people do you know who actually use AR every day, walking around on the street? Like it's kind of a gag at the moment. You see the people posting on Instagram with like their Vision Pro on while pretending to drive a car. I think we're in the early days of mainstream adoption of AR outdoors, just in general. And I think this conversation has been pretty fun for me because we're reflecting on the fact that indoor map adoption and use cases is like 20 years behind. We've still got to get the ground floor and the foundations right before we can build the second floor of the house. So I think there's going to be really great point examples of AR. And the reason why, my colleague Ed's wearing one is because we're thinking about some of those right now. But I would be the first to tell you that, hey, like that's for one or two specific customers who know exactly what they want. And I don't want to give away too much on this call because it's something that we're going to put out soon. That's hopefully very compelling to a certain class of customers. But I think that the general excitement that we feel is towards, hey, it's now possible to just map the indoors. We're at less than 1%, and it's starting to be obvious that it's missing. And it's now valuable to map the indoors because people are noticing that it's missing because they want it in their, and they want to know which desk they're going to book when they show up at WeWork. They want to plan their trip before they go to the outlet mall because they only have 2 hours instead of 5 because Netflix is pretty good. So people now expect all of this functionality that we already take for granted, and it's driving the 100% adoption of maps, on top of which you're going to build all these other applications. And AR is sure to be one of them, but I would be surprised if it's like a 10% use case anytime soon.
I appreciate your insights there. I want to just point back towards the PDF being the standard and the fact that we still need to create base maps for these indoor environments before we start jumping ahead to, virtual reality, augmented reality, and we still need to get this positioning thing right. So, and I'm not trying to sort of rain on anyone's parade here. I think it's important to sort of realize, like, what is it that people are paying for today? Where is it they see the value today? And when I think about your company, I think about this idea of base maps and general sort of navigation, like getting those foundational things right before we start heading off into the fantasy of the future. Yeah, so I just want to sort of ground people a little bit.
And I don't want to rain on anyone's parade either. I think it's so fun hearing about and just hearing from all the partners that reach out to us, the people that are making maps using our tools every day and creating their own base maps, and then their ideas of what they can do with it are always better than ours. And maybe it's just I am and Mappedin is so focused on how do we build tools so that we can have coverage. How do we enable those base maps to exist at scale and over time? Because maintenance matters even more than creation indoors. It changes all the time. We don't think we're the smartest people when it comes to building applications and solutions. We listen to our partners, we listen to our customers. They tell us what they want to do. We try to help them do it. Maybe that's just our lane, and that's our role in the universe, and we're quite happy with it.
But if I did ask you to sort of look out into the future again, we've done a little bit of future gazing, here towards the end of the conversation. Yeah. So let's continue with this.
Sure.
In one of our initial conversations, you mentioned this idea of one map everywhere, seamless navigation. If you had to guess, and you kind of do, when are we going to get there?
It won't be next year. 20 years ago, we thought it would take 10% of the population working 10 years nonstop. And then 10 years ago, we built our initial tools, and other people eventually built similar tools that made the process about 10 times faster. And then last year, we released Mappedin Premium, which is yet again 10 times faster because of automation and AI. So now you could presumably map all of the indoors with 0.1% of the US population over 10 years, which sounds like still pretty close to impossible until you add up all of those paper scribblers that are already doing it. Like just the firefighters are probably going to be able to do this over 10 years now if they adopted the right tools and the right workflows. Never mind if you add on and you back them up with everybody who has some responsibility managing and building, that produce manager, the office manager, the facility coordinator, the insurance underwriter, the city permit officer. If all of those people pitched in, we could, I think, just on first principles, doesn't matter what tools, but if you believe that the tools are now going to be this efficient, you could imagine that you could probably create that data set of the indoor world over the next 5 years with just 10% engagement from all the map scribblers that already exist. I'm going to be optimistic and say, I think in 5 years, we will have at least one, but probably many, cobbled together data sets of the indoors base maps, if you will, maintained by somebody, at least one person. And at that point, I think you can now build those ubiquitous applications that assume this exists and go from there. Yeah. And I have some guesses as to what's going to be the 100% coverage drivers that matter. And it depends on which part of the world you're in, of course, but let's presume that, you're in New Zealand, I'm in Canada, so we're talking about the developed world. Public safety seems to be this use case that cuts across everything because again, they're already scribbling on maps. So let's just give them better tools. Insurance seems to be one as well for, pretty obvious reasons. They're already collecting all the data and they're processing it largely manually. When your house floods, somebody has to show up at your house and estimate, sometimes with a tape measure, the square footage or square meters of the carpet that has to be replaced. Well, like that should all just be infrastructure. Like you should be able to walk into a house in the future as an insurance appraiser and just pull up the file. Just like you should be able to walk into any building today and assume that there's Wi-Fi. 10 years ago, you couldn't do that. I think in 5 years, you might be able to assume that there's going to be a digital map of the building. Just like today, you can assume that there's going to be Wi-Fi, there's going to be internet. I can run all the digital stuff I need on top of that.
So I'm still stuck in this idea of Mappedin creating these base maps and how important these base maps are for, in terms of a foundational layer when we think about navigation and analysis. When I think about base maps, so there's quite a few different providers out there in the world now.
Sure.
Where you can basically just drag a base map into, for me, it's QGIS as an example. And, I don't need to worry about that. And then I put all my other data on top of that. But this is for the outdoors, and we talked about the outdoors being public. Is there a world where this will be true for the indoors? Or is it that, because it's private property, people aren't just going to we're not going to see these big providers creating, the 5 or 6 standard sort of base maps for the world just because the indoors is private?
Again, it depends on where you live. I think it's hard to imagine in Canada and places like Canada that you're ever going to have a ubiquitous base map of all the private properties because, that just offends the sensibilities and doesn't make any sense. But I think it's a lot like Wi-Fi again, where you should be able to assume that every building reasonably has Wi-Fi, but most of it's password protected. However, that password might be on the wall. It might actually be open just with a portal. And there might be protocols that allow certain people and certain use cases to access this, essentially this utility. And there's already, I think, paradigms that we're used to in the West around every building has to file a permit and a permit drawing, for example. And we entrust that the city is going to have a copy of that. We entrust a copy probably to Mr. Fireman because, he might carry you out of the building if anything really bad happens. And so there's already these protocols that exist for how we share information that is default private. And I think Mappedin we're focused on making tools that allow the map scribblers to work digitally and to make them, 10 times more efficient, 100 times more efficient. What they choose to do with that is up to them. It's up to society. Maybe we have a voice in it too, if we do our jobs right, and maybe we can try to pull together consensus. But that's, it's part of the mystery. We'll see.
We will see. Hey, this is probably a great time to wrap up the conversation. I want to thank you very much for your time. We've said the name of your company quite a few times, Mappedin. There'll be a link to that in the show notes. So people can try these things. You gave me a demo earlier. It was actually pretty interesting the way it worked. But where can they go to try it? We mentioned this, we can start with a PDF or we can start with this app that you've created or you have SDKs. Do we have a special link or is it just mappedin.com?
Just mappedin.com. Hopefully it's all there and clear for you to see. And we'd love for people to just give it a try. We put our best work right up front. And if you want to talk to us because you want to do more or we got something wrong, we'd love to hear from you.
Cool. Thank you very much, Hanwei. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, likewise. And hopefully see you in person once again soon.
Yeah, let's make it Banff or somewhere equally beautiful.
Dude, you live in New Zealand. I'll come to you.
Great, yeah. Come to me. I would love that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you again.
I really hope you enjoyed that episode with Hongwei. I'll put links to where you can catch up with him on LinkedIn, and of course also to Mappedin, where you can try out some of the stuff for yourself. I've created an account, I've made some maps. It's really intuitive, it works really well, and it's worth playing around with, I think. So you can either Google Mappedin or check out the show notes for some more details. Thank you very much for listening in all the way to the end. It's much appreciated. I'll be back again soon. I hope that you'll take the time to join me then.